Hi, welcome to the Israel First television program with myself, Martin Blackham. Natalie's behind the scenes today. We've got a very special program for you, Jewish-Christian relations. This is the Jerusalem Post, and over here we've got the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, with the Christian media, and the title is Among Friends. Jerusalem Post reported that Prime Minister Netanyahu had the very first Christian media summit, and he said to them, Israel has no better friends, I mean that, no better friends in the world. He told the Christian media who were gathered for this very first Christian media summit. And in the studio today we have Rabbi Pesach Wilicki. Thank you so much for coming across, being with us today.
Thank you for having me, Martin.
Appreciate your time. Who's working in the forefront of Jewish-Christian relations, and he's going to be talking with us today about a fantastic book. It's called Pirkei Avot, The Ethics of the Fathers, and you're going to not want to miss this, and let your friends know that we're going to be doing hopefully, Pesach, more programs on the ethics of the fathers, because it's such an important work for us. Rabbi Pesach Wilicki was born in the United States. He was raised in Canada and made Aliyah to Israel in 1994. He's an associate director and lecturer at the Center for Jewish Christian Understanding and Cooperation. He was previously head of a yeshiva in Israel and a rabbi in the United States. He's worked as a political activist in several organizations, including program director for the Coalition of Jewish Concerns and the director of the Campaign for Missing Israeli Soldiers. He's written for Breaking Israel News, Israel National News, Charisma News, the magazine and the news service, and he lives in Bet Shemesh. So, Pirkei Avot, the ethics of the fathers. And by the way, Pesach, just before we start, two things. First of all, you can get hold of this. This is actually on Amazon. I discovered when I was doing the research for the program, you can get hold of this if you'd like. This actual book is available on Amazon. And the second thing, before we start, is that Rabbi Pesach has done a book, Cup of Salvation, and they can get that as well from... How can they get hold of that?
They can get it on Amazon.
You can get that on Amazon. This goes through the Book of Psalms, and you'll want to get hold of that. So, Pirkei Avot, the ethics of the fathers. Why? Tell us a bit about it and how it, for Christians, particularly for our audience, how is this going to help them? How is it going to change their lives?
Well, you know, Martin, let's first make it clear, I didn't write The Ethics of the Fathers. The Ethics of the Fathers, or Pirkei Avot, which actually, the translation of Pirkei Avot is actually Chapters of the Fathers, which is a much more boring name than Ethics of the Fathers. But Ethics of the Fathers is a good name. Even though it's not a direct translation, this book has been a guide, a spiritual guide and a source of inspiration and direction for the Jewish people for about 2,000 years. It's an ancient book, and it's part of the Mishnah. The Mishnah is a body of work that was composed in Israel in the 2nd century.
And it's a library of books. Really,
it's really it's a library of books. It's a compendium of Jewish law. So almost all of the Mishnah is Jewish law. And it goes subject by subject. So there's the laws of the Sabbath, and there's the laws of the festivals, and there's the laws of the temple service. And each volume in the set of the Mishnah is devoted to a certain topic of Jewish law. One exception to that is this book. So in this large set of books that go through every single topic of Jewish law, there's one book that isn't law. And it's the book called The Fathers. So it was originally just called The Fathers. People started calling it the Chapters of the Fathers. And in English and in some other languages, when it's translated, it's often referred to as the Ethics of the Fathers, because that really says what it is. If you just call a book The Fathers, like, people, oh, well, what is it? Is it just a book of stories about, about the patriarchs, or? But it's not.
So it's a book about ethical living.
It's a book of ethics. But when I say ethics, I don't just mean ethics in the sense of of how, what's the right way to live your life and what's the moral thing to do, the ethical thing to do. In a much broader sense, it's teachings for what the right perspective is on life and what is the right approach to many, many different situations and all kinds of, and many different spiritual lessons that really guide us on our journey and on our walk with God. That's what this book is about. So the first lesson about the book, even before we open it, is the very fact that it was included in a set of books which are all law. You open up the other books of the Mishnah and you're going to find very detailed rules and regulations for every different situation.
And the Mishnah is interesting because it's really expanding on the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, taking the law, and it's expanding how it actually is applicable, because you might have, for example, the Sabbath, and you wouldn't know exactly what to do, but
right.
The Mishnah takes that and it expands it.
Right. For example, just so people understand what that looks like. So in Scripture, it says that you shall do no manner of work on the Sabbath day. Now, that's a very nice thing to say. Okay, we're not allowed to do any work, but what does that mean? How about if I rearrange the furniture in my house on my day off? So is that work or not? Well, it's not my job, but it is laborious activity. So does that count as work? Or how about if I'm doing some calculations about my business dealings and I'm just sitting at the table doing them? It doesn't look like I'm working. I'm not working up a sweat, but I'm involved in my work. So defining what does it mean? What does it mean when the Lord said, you shall do no work on the Sabbath day? In order for us to have a community that is all living a life according to the same definitions and the same set of rules, we have to interpret these things, and we have to have a set of interpretations that's agreed upon. That's the basis of what's known as rabbinic law or Jewish law. So whereas in the Bible, it'll say, you shall do no manner of work. If you open up the volume of Mishnah that deals with the Sabbath, you'll have many, many details of what is permissible and what is forbidden and what's the gray area. That's what most of the books of the Mishnah, again, with the exception of the Fathers, look like. And the very fact that the compilers, back in the 2nd century, that the compilers of the Mishnah chose to include this book really speaks volumes. And I think that's a very important lesson.
And whereabouts in the Mishnah is it? Is it in the middle, or is it at the end of it?
Oh, that's interesting. That's a great question. The Mishnah is divided. There are many volumes in the Mishnah,
right,
meaning the Sabbath and the festivals and like I said, and the temple service and many other things. The Mishnah is divided into 6 sections, and within each section you have a bunch of subtopics. So for example, the Sabbath and the festivals, which are each divided in their own volume. So there's a tractate on Passover, and there's a tractate on tabernacles, right? And there's a tractate. There's a tractate for the Day of Atonement, meaning there's a volume for each of them, and the Sabbath is in there also, because that's all the same category. These are holy days. These are sacred days, and therefore all the different sacred times are all included in one section, right, which is called Moed, which means times. Right. And then there's another one of the 6 sections is all about the temple service, and it's called Kodashim, which means sanctified things. And so you'll have different volumes that deal with different types of sacrifices or different types of things that go on in the temple or even the structure of the temple. And that's all one section. So among the 6 sections of the entire corpus of the Mishnah, the Fathers is included in a section that deals with damage law and the legal system. So for example, the other volumes in that section are contracts, real estate law, damage law, how the court system works, what punishment, how the court gives out punishments of various kinds. And in that section, that's where they included this.
That's interesting because it's in the legal section, which is one of the things of the coin of justice and mercy. It's this thing of the judge has to make a decision, but there's justice, with the law, and then there's the mercy section, and then you've got this ethics. Suddenly you've got the book of ethics. Very interesting.
So I think that if we could really focus in on it, and here's maybe a lesson that someone listening to all of this, besides all of the interesting historical notes and the overview and the details of what this book is, if we want to have a take-home lesson, even before we've opened the book, there's a take-home lesson just from where this book is in the set, that the sages, the Jewish sages from the 2nd century who included this book where they included it were saying, look, you have your dealings with your neighbors, you have your dealings with your business associates, you have your dealings with society, and there's rules that govern those things. The book that tells you what the right attitude is, what the right spiritual mindset is, what the right way of approaching and reacting to your fellow man and to God. The book of ethics, and that's where it belongs. Because all these other details of the law, whether it's contracts or real estate or debt or tort law or the court system, are all really, they're how we deal with problematic situations.
Right.
But at the core, we need to be ethical, and we need to view other people as the scripture says, every person you meet is a being that carries the image of God. And every person that you meet has to be treated with the respect that the image of God deserves.
I remember a story of a police officer who, there was a burglary reported and the police attended. I think it was in the United States, and the police officer was there, and there was a burglar, and he arrested him, and he discovered that he'd done it because he had no clothes, and he had a whole history then. So the police officer bought him clothes, he clothed him, and he found him a job and everything, and changed his life. But he could have just left him to the legal system. He could have just said, well, you've broken the law, and this is the consequence. But he went beyond the letter of the law and helped the guy, changed his life.
Right, and if you think about that story, that's a beautiful story, Martin. And when you think about what comes before that story, here's what I mean. Why doesn't every police officer do that? Not because they're bad people necessarily, but there's something about that police officer. What he came into that situation with was a certain spiritual orientation, a certain psychological, or we can call it ethical or moral mindset that he brought into that encounter with this burglar that made him behave that way. And that's what this book is all about. This book is saying, look, you're going to have all kinds of situations you're going to be dealing with in life, but underneath that, the infrastructure, as it were, or the underlying attitudes that you bring to life, that's what it's really about. So in the very same section that it's talking about all of these legal situations, there's this book that's telling us what the right attitude is.
It's really, really amazing.
And there's a lot to learn from it.
If you've just joined us, we've got Rabbi Pesach Walicki in the studio, and we're looking at the ethics of the fathers. And it's very interesting how Christians are getting very excited about studying Torah. Some people call it a Torah movement, and they're very excited about studying these Jewish works. How do you find that when you're coming and you're talking about ethics of the fathers, and now Christians are interested in this?
Well, I think it's beautiful, and it's what's supposed to happen. From a Jewish perspective. I can't speak from a Christian perspective. I'm a Jew. I'm a rabbi. And from a Jewish perspective, we've been waiting for this for a very, very long time. There are Jewish scholars going back centuries who predicted that as we got closer to the end times, to the time period of the ingathering of the people of Israel to our land, the restoration of the prominence of Israel, which is the big story of what's happened to the Jewish people in the last century. Well, concurrent with that, and this goes all the way back to Scripture, when the people of Israel return to their land, and we've talked about this in previous visits to the program, when the people of Israel come back to the land, one of the things that's supposed to happen according to Scripture is an awakening among the nations. Well, that's not just some abstract thing that we could have a painting of people from the nations, traveling to Israel. That's reality. And part of that awakening is, of course, support for Israel and tourism and visits. But part of it is also a real relationship and building that relationship around ideas that can enrich us and create a richer and more vibrant shared spiritual space. So we've been waiting for this. And what's especially interesting and inspiring to me about something like Ethics of the Fathers is that Scripture, Christians already know Scripture. They know the importance of Scripture. And when I look at a book like Ethics of the Fathers, and I know that this book was written, it was compiled, I should say, in the 2nd century. Most of the rabbis quoted in this book are from well before the 2nd century, and their teachings had been passed down through the generations and were prominent teachings that were in Jewish society and were compiled into these books, into the Mishnah. And I'm not a Christian, but for a Christian, when Christians look back at the founders of Christianity who were Jewish and who were living in this land at the time that these teachings were the prominent teachings, when in their youthful days, those founders of Christianity, when they were being raised as children, as Jewish children in this land, they were taught these things.
Wow. So that would be like the early church, and even in the time of Jesus, there would have been these teachings.
They would have been aware of. They would definitely have been aware of these teachings, and these would have been the ethical teachings that they were raised with. So I would imagine that if a Christian was exposed, and that's what we hope to do. That's what we plan to do in the subsequent episodes of this program. That's what we're starting here today, and we're inviting everyone to join us on that journey. I would imagine that as Christians get exposed to these teachings, they will gain something that even Jews don't gain, which is they'll be hearing teachings and being exposed to teachings that the founders of Christianity were exposed to as well, and that creates a deeper meaning.
It's such an exciting time that we live in. That that it's really a hunger. You're watching today, and there's people who are really hungry to dig deeper, to have more to do, not just research, but for spiritual enlightenment. You're watching today, and they're wanting to learn more about the ethics of the fathers, to gain God's wisdom. I think you could call it as well a book of wisdom, couldn't you?
Absolutely, and again, it's chapters of the fathers, and it's a very interesting title. They could have titled it a lot of different things, and this title has been the title for close to 2,000 years. This is the title of the book, the Fathers, and there's actually some debate among more recent scholars. Why did they call it that? And some attribute it to the fact that the teachings are coming from the earlier generations, and therefore it's from the fathers. Others say no, the word Av, which means father, also means primary teaching, meaning that a derivative teaching comes from, like an axiom, as it were,
right.
a more primary idea. And others say, no, the reason that the book is called The Fathers has nothing to do with people who are fathers, but it's saying all the other ideas about living having a legal system and having rules and regulations, that's all secondary. The primary ideas that underlie all of that, as I was saying before, are these ideas. The ideas about what your attitude is towards your fellow man and how you walk with God in a proper and truthful way. And those are the ideas that are dealt with in this book. So that's another interpretation of the title.
Wow.
These are the chapters of the axioms. These are the chapters of the fundamental ideas that we build all of the other ideas on. So it's going to be a great journey. I'm really looking forward to continuing this discussion and really getting in, line by line, and we're going to go through it.
What's very interesting is that at the moment there's a big movement. I was looking in the news, and it says, but this is in the United States, there's a big movement to bring back the Bible into courts, into the public school system, to bring back the 10 Commandments, which sadly were removed from some courts, and it's a whole new movement of people, and maybe you're even involved in this, and let us know that, you know, there's people who are looking to put the Bible back into the court system. So it's very interesting that we're talking about this, that the main kind of wisdom, the main kind of ethics, you know, are coming back, and you know, it's such a, but when I've got this this book here, but this is only just a part. This is only just a part of it. Is that right, or?
This is one of many different options. If you go to Amazon and you search Ethics of the Fathers or Chapters of the Fathers, you will find many different options, many different commentaries that are available out there.
Right. There'll be small groups who will want to study this. You realize that there are going to be people watching today, and they'll say, "We'd like to study this as a small group." Is that possible? That are they biting off too much?
They could, but you know, I think they would have to choose carefully what commentary, and you know, maybe that's something that we could do. Is I could talk about some commentaries that I'm familiar with that I would recommend. Right. And also we have to bear in mind that the commentaries, there's never been an awareness that Christians want to study rabbinic texts like this. Right. So this is a bit out of the box. So people writing commentaries to this book, they universally, they always have in mind that they're writing for a Jewish audience, because that's who studies this. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's ever occurred to anyone, including the author of the commentary you're holding in your hand, that he might be writing for a Christian audience or for an audience outside of Judaism. Wow. You know, and so if a group of people watching are saying, "Oh, we're going to get a hold of this commentary and study it together," they need some guidance. You probably need to have some direction or some guidance, you know, for what you're reading, because there could be misunderstandings. You know, I know that when, you know, as a Jew, you know, if I open up a book of Christian thought, you know, to understand Christians better, and I start reading it, quite often I have to call a Christian friend of mine and ask a question like, "What does this term really mean? You know, what's meant by this idea?" Because you know, when things when there's an assumed audience, very often there can be misunderstandings if someone outside of that audience reads that text. So I'm not saying people shouldn't read these things, but just be aware of what you're getting into.
And I think that it's such a new ground that maybe you just need to take it steady, because
just watch the show.
That's it. Because it's there's new concepts, there's new ideas, and you just need the help, like you were saying. You know,
it's also an ancient text, and ancient texts aren't organized or worded. Ancient ideas aren't presented in a modern format. So, you know, when statements are made by rabbis in this book, and you just read through the book, it's just there's a statement, and then there's another statement, and then there's another statement. And to understand how to analyze, how to dissect, and derive meaning from these ancient statements is itself there's a tradition of how to do that that's been passed down since these statements were made. So when in a Jewish school system where they're studying these words, and they're following a certain method for how to understand these words. So someone coming in from the outside may not, you know.
Wow. And it's such an amazing time that we live in, that we're able to not only have the ethics of the fathers, Rabbi Pesach, but we're able to study it in English. You know, you can get an English version. This one's in English and Hebrew, but I mean, you can study it and gain the wisdom from it. And so thank you so much for coming across today. We really appreciate
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Your time. Very, very exciting. And we'll see you right after this.
Shalom, dear friends. We carry on looking at the 10 Commandments. In Ivrit is Aseret Advarim, and now we are looking at the number 9, and this is "You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor." So it's in Exodus 20:13, but when you look in the Christian Bible, sometimes it's a different number. It will be Exodus 20:16. So in Ivrit, in Hebrew, is Lo ta'aneh ve're'acha ed shaker. If you translate it word for word, is "you do not answer against your neighbor." Now, neighbor here, it could be also friend, comrade, companion, so it's somebody close to you. and you don't give a false testimony against them. When you look at the name false, in Hebrew we say shaker. And shaker, you can see the letters is shin, kuf, resh. If you look at the bottom, it is not standing. And the opposite of shaker in Ivrit, in Hebrew, is emet. And emet is aleph, mem, tav. So you can see these three letters are strong, standing really strong. So we know that emet is standing strong. And when you give something who is not right, who is false, one day or another is going to break down if something is wrong with that. And it's not right. Okay. There is also another notion which is in Deuteronomy 19:19, and it's like they will have a punishment to the false witness as they try to punish the defendant. So you see, it's like if you do something wrong, there is a punishment also for it. And there is also another thing in Leviticus 5:1, is like anyone who knows evidence must testify in court, because we are walking towards truth, not walking towards shaker, falseness, because the world can't work with falseness, but the world can stand strong with emet. Isn't it amazing? With truth. Now we look at this commandment, which is you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor, against your friend, against your comrade. And in Ivrit, in Hebrew, is lo ta'aneh ve're'acha ed shaker. We've done it again together. Isn't it amazing how these commandments are so beautiful and make us knowing how to live in a good life and a good daily life? It's amazing. We will see you next week. Bye.
Thank you so much for joining us today as we've been looking at the ethics of the fathers. Thank you so much, Rabbi Pesach, for coming across and helping us to understand this book. We love to receive your emails. Don't forget you can email us at info@israelfirst.org. Visit the website www.israelfirst.org, and remember, we're the program that looks at the land, the people, and the language.